Hey everyone, this is Matt with FlightTrajectory.com. Today is probably one of the most important lessons I've done so far, and I'm going to be talking about how to use the pitch trim in Flight Simulator. So first off, at your joystick, we want to assign the functions for pitch trim nose down and pitch trim nose up to the joystick. What makes the most sense is on this joystick, the Cytec X52, I want to set this button here for pitch trim nose down. So basically the pitch trim is going to relieve control pressures. So if you want to push the yoke forward or trim the yoke forward, we're going to push this top button up here. And then for pitch trim nose up, for pulling back, we're going to use this button down here. Now you could also use a toggle like one of these switches down here. Pitch trim, that'd be nose down, pitch trim nose up. Use something that makes sense on your joystick. For this one, we want to keep it up by our thumbs is probably the most ideal solution, so you can just reach it with your thumb. That's why I'm going to use these two buttons on this joystick. Basically, your goal as a pilot is to atrophy. You want to do the absolute least amount of work as possible. So anytime we're flying around, we don't want to have to be constantly holding pressure forward or constantly holding pressure backward. We always want to be able to basically let go of the yoke, and the plane should stay where we want it to stay. So I'm going to go ahead and unpause the simulator. I have it set to the outside. You can see down here, this little thing down here, that's the trim tab. So basically when we trim nose down, we're moving the tab in the opposite direction that we want to move the elevator. Now the simulator doesn't actually show it, but if we put the pitch trim to nose down, what's actually happening is that trim tab goes up and the aerodynamic forces from that force the elevator this way down. Conversely speaking, if we do pitch trim for nose up, the trim tab actually moves down, and then that in turn moves the elevator up and just displaces the controls so we don't have to hold constant pressure on it. Okay, so here we are in the plane, and the pitch trim control is down here to the right of the mixture. You can see there's a tiny little white indicator, so if I move the pitch trim, I'm going to trim nose down, you can see that white indicator is moving up, and then as I roll the wheel down, that indicator moves down. In the center here, there's a little triangle, that's the takeoff position. So for takeoff, we want to have the trim set there at the takeoff notch. Okay, I'm going to release the brakes and add full power, and we're going to take off, and then I'm going to show you how to use the trim in the air. About 60 knots, you want to rotate. And we're going to establish the climb. Now the basic premise of the pitch is that the pitch trim will always try and find the airspeed to which it was trimmed at. So right now I'm just letting go of the yoke, adding a little bit of aileron as I need left and right for the roll, but I have my hand off the yoke, and it's trimmed at about 65 knots. Now basically what you want to do anytime you're trying to retrim it, you want to adjust your pitch and your power first, and then adjust your trim lastly. So let's say I want to climb out at 70 knots. So I already have full power set in there, so I don't need to do anything with that. But what I'm going to do is lower the pitch because I want to speed up to 70 knots. And then see what I have to do to hold it there. So there's 70 knots right there, and if I let go of the yoke, it's going to want to start pitching up and slowing down. So to hold 70 knots, I'm having to hold a little bit of forward pressure on it. So that means I need to pitch trim nose down. So I'm going to use this top button here, add just a little bit of trim, and then let go of it and see what it does. And that's pretty close right there, actually. Now let's say I want to slow down to, let's slow to 55 knots. So first, pitch, power, and trim. So pitch is adjusting by pulling back. There's 55 knots. The power is already adjusted. And then to hold 55 knots, you can see I'm having to keep the joystick held back to keep it there. So I don't want to hold it back. I want to be able to let go and keep it there. So I'm going to trim nose up so that it'll maintain the 55 knots. And you can see it's doing a pretty good job of holding that. Maybe I still need a little bit of back pressure. So your main goal here is you're always adding, you're always trying to relieve the control pressure so that I can leave the yoke, let it sit there, and the plane does what I want it to. Now notice it keeps trying to speed up, so I still haven't trimmed it off quite enough. So pitch up, find your airspeed, and then add your trim appropriately. That's doing pretty good. Now I'm going to level off here at 3,000 feet. And now, as the plane's speeding up, I'm having to hold constant forward pressure on the yoke. I can start trimming a little bit of it off now, so trim nose down, hold it down. But remember, it's pitch, power, and trim is basically the last thing you're going to do. So as I speed up, see, I need to adjust my pitch. Now I'm going to pull my power back. And basically what I mean when I keep talking about adjusting your pitch, I'm just simply meaning pushing the yoke forward or back. That's adjusting your pitch. Pitch, power, pull the power back a little more, and you can see I'm holding a fair bit of forward pressure on the yoke to keep the plane where I want it, so I need to trim nose down. It still wants to climb, so I still need to trim nose down. And then again, you can always just let go and see what it wants to do, and you can see the nose is trying to climb. I'm going to keep pushing down, keep trimming forward. It takes a little bit to get used to. Okay, so you don't want to fly completely with the pitch trim. Like, you're still going to have to make corrections up and down on the yoke to keep it where you want it, but for the most part I can let go and the plane's staying where I want it to. So it's a level flight at 3,000 feet, and I'm not having to make too many corrections to keep it there. It's pretty much self-sustaining. Now, what I was talking about, that the pitch trim basically always finds an airspeed. So right now we're at 95, almost 100 knots, and if I add power, the plane's going to try and find that airspeed that I trimmed it off to. So I'm just going to go ahead and shove it full power. Notice I'm not touching the yoke at all. I'm just going to use a little left and right aileron there. Adjusting the trim at all. So notice that you looking at the vertical speed indicator, we've started to climb, and you can see the speed is holding pretty steady right at 90 knots where it was trimmed off to. It was more or less about 95 knots. So the plane's going to go through kind of a series of oscillations as it tries to find that airspeed that we're trimmed off to. So it'll go up and down a little bit, but it'll eventually stabilize at 95 knots. Now conversely, I can pull the power all the way back, and notice I'm still not touching the yoke. I haven't done anything with that. As I pull the power back, the plane slows down, and as it slows down, the nose is diving down to gain airspeed and try and find that 95 knots that we were trimmed to. So there's nothing electronic about that. It's strictly a mechanical way, that just the way the pitch trim works is that the plane's always trying to find an equilibrium. In this case, we had it trimmed to 95 knots. So you can see it's kind of bouncing back and forth between about 100 knots and 90 knots, just going back and forth, and eventually it'll reach let's say I'm going to stop the descent at 2,000 feet. And remember, whenever we trim, we adjust our pitch and our power first, and then we do the trim. Sometimes you might do power first and then the pitch, but in either case, the pitch and the power are adjusted before you do the trim, because otherwise it's not going to do anything for you. Okay, there's 2,000 feet, so I'm going to level off, adjust my pitch back to level, add my power back in. I'm going to use about 2,300 RPM. See where that lands me. Now, we had it trimmed up for level flight before, so I probably don't need to do much with the trim. If I let go, it's actually staying there. It's going a little bit nose down, so I'm going to add a little bit of nose up trim. And that's pretty good right there. Now, any power setting and trim setting will also give us a certain vertical speed. So, for instance, let's say I want to climb at 500 feet a minute. So we're going to pitch first for about 500 feet a minute, adjust the power. Anytime we're climbing, we want to use full power. And then I'm going to trim. So right now I'm having to hold just a little bit of back pressure to hold that 500 feet a minute. Let go of it, see what it does. We're even getting better than 500 foot a minute, so we can actually reduce the pitch a little. Down, and that'll yield us a 500 foot per minute climb, which is also in this case 95 knots. Here's 100 knots there. 95 knots at full power is giving us 500 feet a minute. So you can essentially trim it for a vertical speed to maintain a set vertical speed, but ultimately the plane's always looking for that airspeed to which is trimmed off. And so remember, if I pull the power back, it's going to still try and find that 95 knots. Now, let's actually cruise. I'll show you another example here. I'm going to cruise at 80 knots instead of 95. So I'm just holding my altitude here at 2,800 feet. There's 80 knots. Adjust my power to maintain that. And then just let go of the yoke and see what it does. He wants to nose down. So we're going to pull it back, maintain our altitude, and since I'm holding constant back pressure on it, I need to trim it nose up. Right about there. So we're maintaining 80 knots, level flight, not really touching the yoke. Here, once it's trimmed out, you just make small corrections on it. So there you have it. That's pretty much a nutshell of how the pitch trim works. Remember, your ultimate goal, anytime you're flying, if you want it to climb, you adjust your pitch by pulling the yoke back or pushing the yoke forward. If we're climbing, pitch, then adjust your power, give it full power for the climb, and then just let go of the yoke and see what it does. If you're having to hold the yoke back, then you want to trim nose up. If you're having to push the yoke forward, like during a descent, then you have to trim nose down. But in either case, your end goal, you should always be able to let go of the yoke and have it maintain the pitch attitude that you want, whether you're going for an airspeed or just level flight, or if you're going for a vertical speed, whether climbing or descending. We always want to keep our hand more or less off the yoke. Anytime you can let go of it, it stays where you want, and that means you're trimming correctly. Alright guys, thanks for watching this lesson. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and you can check me out on Facebook.com. Hopefully I'll be bringing some products to the market this year. I know I've been saying that for a little while now, but things kind of move slowly sometimes. But anyhow, thanks for watching, and catch you guys next time.